we have a program in Africa called African Hunter, and it's a big pressure point in the media at the moment, the whole idea of going to African hunts. And I came across this extraordinary thing about sustainable conservation. I've been really keen to meet you ever since, because it kind of aggregates all the really, to me, important wildlife stories, and it has a pro-hunting filter. You're telling stories that come from your background as a BBC journalist, amongst others, and yet you're doing it with hunting in mind. Is that fair or not quite right?
That's pretty fair. I set it up having run a site that was purely on political and economic news out of Africa. And then, as I began to move my research that I do away from just African politics and history and into what has led to books like my book.
He's doing the plug. He's doing the plug for the book. But you can't stop these journalists once they write a book.
And the most out this week.
Oh yeah. The next one. This is true about all the university bookshops.
Every good bookshop. Well, any bookshop that doesn't have it, it's quite obviously not good. But I began to spend more time researching aspects of conservation in Africa. And because I've been to Botswana, and Botswana, if any of you have been there, is a really fantastic place to go for game viewing, and it used to be, and maybe again, somewhere that has very good, well-regulated hunting. And hunting and this is something, and it's why my site is called Sustainable Conservation. I believe that if you're going to hunt, you must do it sustainably, you must do it in a way that adds to the local economy, helps local people, and is in tune with what they want.
Now, as a former BBC journalist, you are slightly unique in thinking that way, are you not?
Very unique, because as my wife Liz, who's in the audience, will tell you, I sit and watch BBC documentaries, BBC News, see things on the BBC website about conservation and wildlife in Africa, and I start foaming at the mouth.
You were a BBC World Service journalist, weren't you, originally? Well, as part of your career, main part of your career. How did you get from there to basically promoting hunting?
I wouldn't say promoting hunting.
What do you do?
Well, it's because I put what I hope is an accurate picture of the way you need to carry out conservation. And in a way, it was my BBC career that started it. My first job with the BBC was at a place called the Monitoring Service, where we monitored foreign radio stations. And I was sent out in 1981 to Malawi, then ruled by the redoubtable His Excellency the Life President Ngwazi Dr. H. Kamuzu Banda, the destroyer of the Central African Federation. Strange little man who'd been a doctor in Wilson in the 1930s. He was incredibly autocratic. The country was run, you couldn't say a word against him.
It was the time of the big men, wasn't it? You had him, Kenneth Coder, and it was the beginning of the Mugabe era, wasn't it?
Yes, just at the start of the Mugabe era. But I was stationed out there, and they had some little known but really good wildlife parks. And I used to take this BBC car, and we weren't a flash bit of the BBC car, we weren't like correspondents who get top of the range 4x4s. We had an old Morris Marina without a second gear.
That's so good. So we're in the 1970s now?
1981.
1981.
And I used to drive this up to Kasungu National Park on dirt roads where you needed a good 4x4 and literally smash the arse out of the car. On one occasion, and Liz will remember it, we limped back the 80 or 90 miles from Kasungu to Lilongwe, having smashed the engine mountings. And I don't know how the engine stayed in the car. But we saw lots of elephants, we saw lots of other wildlife, and I got the bug.
But normal BBC people would just leave it at that. You know, there's lovely large animals, I've seen them tick, I took a photograph. But you went a step further and decided that hunting that wasn't such a bad thing, possibly a good thing.
Yes, I mean, I'd be very tempted. When I did my postgraduate research at Aberystwyth University, the most far-flung university in Britain, we lived in a lovely little village called Talabont, luckily only 10 yards from the local pub. And behind us was a whole area of common land. And the people from the village, most of them had shotguns, were allowed to go and shoot on this common land.
This is the Great Bog of Tregaron, isn't it? Isn't that common land?
No, no, it's further north.
Further north, okay.
Further north. Going up to between Aberystwyth and the often mispronounced Mahumford.
Ah, Passion Tickliff.
And I was very tempted while I was there to get a shotgun license, because we love game meat, but we left there too soon and I didn't. But when I went out to Botswana to make a BBC programme all about conservation and ivory, it was after the ivory ban was introduced. And for Botswana, this was a real pain. Because even now, Botswana has still got the largest population of elephants anywhere in Africa.
Even now, after 4 or 5 years of a hunting ban that has had a pretty dire effect on quite a lot of wildlife.
Yes, and when I went out there, I went to a lot of the wildlife areas, I saw people in government, I saw local people, and what I learned there is they, at the time, and this was 1993, had a pretty workable system of conservation. If you think of it, and this is an ideal version of it, like an archery target. In the middle, the red centre would be the national park, the fully protected area. The rings around it would be private concessions. Some of them private photographic safari concessions, and some of them hunting concessions.
So once you got a concession, it was up to you what you do with it, but you had breadth there.
You had breadth. Normally they would have been identified as the government. This is a commercial safari sector, this is a hunting concession. And people could bid for them, pay for the concession, and then hunt them. And of course, when they hunted, and these are arid areas, they would set up boreholes to produce water. So there was water all year round. They would set up their own anti-poaching units, because they didn't want people coming in poaching the animals that they would sell to visiting hunters.
Were the hunting areas richer than the photographic safari areas? Did they pay more for those areas?
Not necessarily, not necessarily, but you often had to pay twice in the sense you would pay to lease the land, and the local community that lived on that land would have the hunting quota. So you would pay that community for the hunting quota. So for example, last year we were in Botswana, hunting ban still in place, and I met the chief of a small village north of Maun. Maun is the main safari centre in Botswana.
It's a jump off Okavango and all that,
yes.
Sort of areas. And you can also reach parts of Kalahari from there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, last year, for example, we went up to right to the very north, western Linyanti, great place, right on the border of Namibia, elephants, lions, very good leopards, wild dogs. Then we went down into the central Kalahari Grain Reserve, all with Maun as your centre. And it was one of the centres for the hunting industry. And this little village, Sankuyo, 40 kilometres or so north of Maun, they sold their hunting quota. And they're a village of a few hundred people. They got $600,000 a year.
American dollars?
Yes, for selling the quota. They got that money directly. Didn't go to the government. They sold their quota to a hunting outfitter, and they would run the safaris, the hunting safaris.
They wouldn't have spent that on wildlife conservation exactly, would they?
No, because then money for the lease, for example, would go to the government, and licence fees would go to the government, which would go towards conservation and anti-poaching and that sort of thing.
Okay, so is that the reason why, when people talk about the money that goes into the community from trading hunting that benefits conservation, is it that $600,000 that is doing it?
Certainly in Botswana, and they have now, after about a 5-year ban, they are reinstating hunting.
And is it as simple to say that the locals see the value of the animals because of that money, and that is it?
Absolutely, because I interviewed the chief of this village, wonderfully named Timex Moalosi, and he said to me, we made money from this. They knew that $600,000 was animal money. It came in because they sold it to the hunting operators. The hunting operators would supply us with meat. If they shot an elephant, for example, on a trophy licence legally, the hunter would have the right to take the trophy, and normally it was the tusks or perhaps the head as well. most of the meat, the hunter is not going to take, suitcases full of meat back to the States or Germany or Britain. The meat went to the local community and was an important source of protein. They shot a lot of buffalo there on license. That meat will go to the community. Also, they found that lions, hyenas, wild dogs, leopards did not attack their livestock in the farming areas when you had the hunting concession as a buffer between the protected areas and the farming areas.
So there's several layers of benefit here,
yes,
to the community and therefore to the wildlife. All right, I kind of feel I know this already. How is this not getting through to people like American Congress, which is now looking once again at a trophy import ban?
I think it's because lots of people, not the sort of people who have come to the game fair, not a lot of the academic community. If you look at the academic community doing conservation biology and conservation research in Britain, most of them, some of them reluctantly because they don't like the idea of trophy hunting. I mean, take for example the very well-known Dr. David MacDonald. He runs an organisation called the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford University. He's the man who put the collar on Cecil the lion. He wrote a paper commissioned by the then Minister of the Environment, Rory Stewart, about trophy hunting and lion conservation. And he said, I don't like hunting, I've never hunted, I wish you didn't have to have hunting, but if you stop hunting in countries like Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, even Tanzania, where it's not so well regulated, you reduce what he calls, and I think it's a good word for it, the lion estate. The land available to lions, but also other wildlife.
The cornerstone species idea. Now, you're not going to tell me that the world of hunting in Africa is an absolutely perfect world where all the wildlife is flying across the savannah, because there are problems, aren't there?
Yes, there are problems. One of the problems in a country, for example, like Tanzania, which I know quite well, the only country where I've been held at gunpoint while a journalist, when I was doing work on the black market in currency there. Its hunting has a lot of corruption. Corruption in the granting of licences, corruption in the monitoring of those licences, which means it is not well run. But even then, if you take away the hunting concessions, and a lot of them are vacant at the moment, that is then turned over to the cow and the plough, and the wildlife is lost completely. So even sometimes badly regulated hunting is better worse
none at all.
than alternatives.
Okay, got it. Right. The word trophy hunter is pretty emotional, emotive at the moment. Is there anybody here who feels they just don't like the idea of trophy hunting with a capital T? Put up your hand if you don't like it. No shame if you don't like it. Is there anybody here who supports the idea of hunting tourism as you just had it explained? Do you support the idea of hunting tourism? You're a very average audience here. You've got 4 hands actually support hunting tourism. Nobody's really against it. Well, that's pretty good. Okay. Well, I'd like to introduce a couple more people to the stage, please. We've heard from Keith. We have some real live hunters here. We have Simon Barr. We also have Steve Jones, who from the Historical International. Simon's just come back from Uganda, so he's going to talk a little bit about Mr. Karamojo Bell. And Steve, once he's taken his jacket off, is going to come up here and talk to us about the Historical International, which is head of the London chapter. Could I ask you just to hand me a chair? Otherwise we'll have to make Steve stand. Thank you very much. Right. Pull that chair over there. Now, I want to widen this debate a little bit because you guys are actually hunters. Do you shoot at all?
Yes, I do.
I have my...
There we are.
Okay, DSC well done. Right, let's start with Simon. Simon, tell me about Uganda, which you just done.
Uganda was a very exciting opportunity. I hunted in 6 different countries in Africa, various different species. And as a boy, I grew up reading the books by a very famous story hunter called Karamojo Bell. And the opportunity to go and hunt in an area which has recently been reopened for hunting, which has completely rehabilitated the wildlife in the area, was offered to me as an opportunity. So I was able to go to Uganda, to Karamoja, to the exact area that Bell shot a lot of elephant back 120 years ago, to hunt. I didn't hunt elephant, there were no elephant there anymore. They were shot during, if you like, the golden era of elephant hunting and ivory plundering from...
Well, we should just stop and just pick up that point, because I'm going to ask this one again to Keith. I was having here as my kind of social historian. There was a bad time in hunting walking there where we did not realise that we could shoot animals to extinction. Is that fair?
Yes, I think it is fair. And even some of the well-known big game hunters. I'm sure most of you have seen the old film with Meryl Streep doing the worst accent possible, Out of Africa, with Robert Redford playing Dennis Finch Hatton, a well-known hunter, but didn't look anything like Robert Redford, I can tell you. Bald as a billiard ball, big ears. Anyway, he was a hunter. He arranged big game safaris, took people like the Prince of Wales on safaris. But by the before his death, obviously, he became very worried about the scale of hunting, particularly lions in the Serengeti and the Mara, and the idea that people were going out on motorised safaris, shooting 50 lions in a couple of days without even getting out of their car. And he started a process, and other well-known hunters like Frederick Selous also became involved in this sort of process, where they suddenly realised the game was disappearing. The elephants, lions, rhino were disappearing.
So there was a sort of wake-up moment.
Yeah,
After the Roosevelt Safari, he was inspired to then create the system of game management in the US,
Which works
amazingly well. They have a census of all the animals every year, and they take off a harvestable crop to make sure that the animals balance with the habitat, and they create an income off the back of that which goes towards conservation.
I want to know more about Uganda in a second. You pass the microphone, Steve, so I'd like to introduce you, Steve. Would you call yourself a trophy hunter?
Just about. It's not a word.
Sounds a bit wishy-washy.
Yeah, exactly. That's a mistake. I have hunted many animals, and I've taken parts, primarily antlers from deer, but I've also had the privilege of hunting Africa quite a few times, and brought antlers and horns and back. And
that must be bringing that to the back.
I'm bringing it exactly in many people's eyes, and but for me, I'm bringing back a memory. And again, you know, my point being that provided that that animal is not wasted, that it goes in the food chain, then what is the harm of bringing back a memory? But I think, of course, the antis have seized this trophy word to generally discredit what we're all agreeing that legitimate, responsible hunting can be very beneficial to wildlife and habitat.
Okay, good. So just very quickly say, one of Steve's claims today is he was torn apart by wild animal lovers on the Good Morning Britain programme with Piers Morgan, actually.
So that's probably one of the worst experiences I've had with another animal yet.
Sorry.
It's an interesting thing. I don't go hunting principally because I'm a conservationist. I don't go because I'm trying to harvest meat. I go for adventure and an amazing experience. I love the fact that there is a conservation benefit. I wouldn't do it if there were not. And I love the fact that I can harvest some meat, but that's not my primary reason for going and doing it. And I think as a community where we're getting browbeaten to a point where we have to be guilty and excuse the enjoyment of the sport of what they're doing, and whether you shoot an elephant or 250 pheasants in a day, you know, we are taking part in something which is killing an animal ultimately for sport, and there's good reason to do that, but we're sort of made to feel guilty about that all the time.
Well, they were characterised as killing an animal for fun, they'd say, and at the moment they say that, you sort of slightly feel on the back foot because you know you're going to have to say, well, it's not exactly fun, it's sport, and you're an anti, and you're not going to understand that word, are you?
Yes, it's a complicated philosophy to someone that doesn't understand it, and it's something that I go to the safari shows in the US, both of them every year, and you know, they purport to be conservation shows. They're trophy hunting shows, and people are there collecting different species from around the world, but they are sort of dressing it up as though they're the biggest conservationists. The biggest conservationists go and do biology degrees, and they go and live in the front line and do all of those sorts of things, but there is a marvellous byproduct of big game hunting which puts a lot of benefit back into conservation, and we wouldn't be able to do it if it weren't for that.
Well, we're going to come back again to Uganda in a sec. Steve, you want to pick that up?
Well, because what I think it's time to turn the tide on the Antis and start saying, look, we're not embarrassed to do this. We do enjoy what we do, but we are enjoying a pursuit that actually is really no different to a cow or a pig being killed for consumption. Why is that acceptable to many people that they then find the killing of other animals? But I think the point being is that we in the hunting world have always been living a life as small conservatives. In other words, we've been discreet and not really shouted about it. And I think this is what's given the Antis quite an advantage.
And social media's been
it has been amazing. We've been talking about that this morning. Can I get a microphone back to Keith, please? Keith, have you picked up the horrors that have hit the poor British shooting show in recent weeks, that the NEC, which hosts Crufts, which also hosts the British shooting show, suddenly clamped down on trophy hunting? What do you make of that?
I wasn't surprised, because I think there is this fear among people who run exhibitions, fear in the media, that if they are seen to be somehow soft on hunting or soft on activities like that, they're going beyond the pale.
But if you ram the message home again and again and again about the conservation benefits, I mean, not the reason that Simon goes hunting, but the benefits of hunting, surely they should work it out. I mean, they're not thick.
Well, they should do, but you find, and I did a big study, academic study, of the media coverage of the killing of Cecil the lion. And what became perfectly obvious, and I know from having been a news programme editor with BBC, you're thinking that you have a subject, who are we going to interview?
I met Walter Palmer.
Ah, you did?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Could Simon have a microphone? You met Walter Palmer?
I met Walter Palmer at Safari Club show in Reno this year, the dentist from Minnesota that shot Cecil with a bow. And I saw him walking down the aisle, and I said, Mr. Palmer, I'm sorry to doorstep you, but I'd really like to hear your side of the story. I'm a fellow hunter, and I didn't believe all that I heard in the press, so let's talk about it. And he said, I'm currently in a 2-year lockout period. He said, I've been on the biggest hunting trip courtesy of all the news organisations because of the libel action and defamation of character after the court case in Zimbabwe that was found that no legal wrongdoing had taken place. A lion with a collar was shot, but that's not illegal. It's best practice to report it. It wasn't reported. However, they had a tag for a lion, and there was no wrongdoing. After that, he was able to go after all of the news organisations, and an out-of-court settlement happened. He got a huge sum of money, and all he does is hunt now.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm glad it worked out.
I think he was being a little bit economical with the truth there. There was wrongdoing, but not by him. There was wrongdoing by Bronkhorst, the professional hunter, and by Ndlovu, who owned the land.
But the court case did say there was no legal wrongdoing.
No, the court case said it wasn't poaching. What they didn't take to court was the fact that they didn't have a valid lion permit for that farm for that year. It was a place they could legally hunt, but they hadn't got the permit.
You can transfer permits in Zimbabwe, and that's what
But they hadn't transferred the permit.
All right. Well, look,
it was illegal. There are no two ways about it.
I recommend that we all go back and Google it. Can you, Simon, just carry on with your story about Uganda. What were you hunting? What did you hunt, and what was it like?
So we were hunting Nile buffalo, which is a species of buffalo. There's the Cape buffalo, the forest buffalo, and the Nile buffalo. They're more unusual, slightly smaller, slightly more aggressive. Most of them are full of AK-47 bullets from the Karamojong warriors that still live in the area, so they're quite angry and nasty creatures. So to hunt one of them in that area, then they shoot them for meat. The more sport hunting that happens there, the less of that goes on, because there's people out seeing poachers and stopping that activity from taking place. So my primary animal that I was after was a Nile buffalo, and then I was able to shoot with an exact replica of Karamoja Bell's rifle that Rigby made. They've made 50 limited Bell rifles made to his exact specification from 120 years ago before one of his trips.
Any of them available to view on the Rigby stand here?
I think they do have a Bell rifle there,
yes. Good, okay, so pop on and see that.
So I was able to hunt other plains game that's very unique to that area. Ugandan cob is one that is not in that area now, and the rifle I took we will be auctioning at Dallas Safari Club, and the proceeds of that auction will go to translocate 150 cob to that area and reintroduce cob as a direct result of my hunting trip, for the benefit of the area, to put animals back that have been shot for bushmeat.
Okay, so. and you loved that trip. You enjoyed that. Everything about that went well for you.
It was incredible, yeah.
Magical. Right, Steve, I'll come to you in a sec. Sorry, Keith, just tell me the story of hunting in Uganda, because it's not on everybody's list, is it?
No, I think because for a long period it was, and some will know more about this, pretty well off limits because of the conflict that went on during Idi Amin's period, where in fact wildlife became, along with the poor people of Uganda, wildlife became the victims. Massive killing of wildlife in the national parks across the whole country by Idi Amin's army, by the rebels fighting him.
For food.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for food.
I was in Murchison in '93, and I don't remember seeing very much now, because that was years later.
And then you had the war that followed that brought Museveni to power, and then the war with the Lord's Resistance Army up in the north. Lord's Resistance Army being an extremely strange millenarian group that still exists in tiny pockets in in Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and South Sudan. But they were driven out of Uganda. And so Uganda was not a place you could go to very, very safely at all. Now it is, and I believe, and I don't know if you have more on this, Simon, that a new Wildlife Act is being brought into being that stresses the importance of sustainable use of the land, whether through hunting, whether through safari tourism or whatever.
So they're joining the roster of hunting countries.
Yes, they clearly have joined the roster, and they are, I think, taking a sensibly pragmatic view.
I mean, as Botswana has rejoined the roster, could Steve have a microphone? Because Steve, the Safari Club International, which you are, as I said before, London chapter head, characterises the pro-hunting countries of Southern Africa as the wildlife winners because of the huge diversity of wildlife they have, and the anti-hunting countries like Kenya, where they are now fencing all of their national parks and basically turning the country into a zoo, as the wildlife losers, where hunting is banned.
Absolutely, the facts speak for themselves. And
sorry, I just landed you with all the facts. I didn't give you room to answer the question at all, did I? It was very unkind of me. Do the best you can.
Well, I'll see what I can make of it. I totally endorse what you've said, but my concern is, and my role is really somewhat more political here in London, and as you may know, I've represented pro-hunting organisations when we met with Michael Gove. One of my frustrations with the anti-hunting, campaign to ban trophy imports, etc., is their refusal to acknowledge the greater problems, which is poaching and loss of land habitat through farming needs, etc.
Well, because they're not really interested in that. They're interested in tough hunting, aren't they? Like the campaign to ban grouse shooting or the campaign to ban fox hunting. Isn't that what it's about?
Absolutely. And so surely our role is to counter that and start challenging them on their evidence, because they rely on constantly bombarding us for evidence and support. And I think it's time we started saying to them, okay, pals, we'd like to work with you to really rid the big problems of poaching and habitat loss. But, where's your evidence? What are you doing about supporting?
Well, okay, so one thing they popped up with recently is part of their research, I think this might be a question for Keith, is to answer, is that hunting makes... I never thought I'd find myself attacking hunting. It's terrible. Hunting makes very little contribution to GDP in southern African countries. I know why that's a stupid, vacuous argument, but Keith, could you answer that one, please?
Yes, I mean, they try to do this thing where they say, how much does trophy hunting contribute to GDP, gross domestic product? And it's not a lot. But nobody has ever said it's a lot. They set up a straw man that they can easily knock down. What it contributes to, like the 600,000 I mentioned earlier, like the money that Namibian community conservancies get directly from having a combination of hunting and photographic tourism, the money then goes locally, stays locally, and people connect that with tolerating wildlife, and that is important. What's not important is the overall contribution to the economy, but it's the contribution to the local economy and people's sense of ownership of their resources.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I feel that tennis doesn't make much of a contribution to the GDP. Perhaps we should ban that. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to add one point to that, which our critics throw at us, is in terms, what are they contributing to these countries? What percentage of donations to wildlife charities actually filter through to the ground? And my suggestion is very little.
And of course, photographic safaris are not as valuable as hunting safaris.
Particularly in the more remote areas. There's and the need for infrastructure and the carbon damage to all of that is far more detrimental than any hunting.
Simon, can you give us a picture of the kind of economic sustainability of what you were doing in Uganda? You don't have to tell us how much you spent, just what's it like out there?
Outside of the reserve, which is an area which the Ugandan people can eat and hunt whatever they want, the reserve, everything is protected. Outside of it, it is a desolate, barren, pretty ugly place. There's litter everywhere. They're living on the outskirts of the towns in mud huts. It's a third world country. You will have seen it in National Geographic or on the news. It's a third world country. The second you get into the national parks, not the national parks, sorry, there's no hunting there. In the reserves, the national reserves, where there is hunting and they're allowed to do things like collecting firewood, which is a sustainable use of resources within the reserve, you see a wonderful landscape of wildlife and, as it should be, a very natural area with a balance between...
Are they fenced, though? Are the parks fenced?
No.
No, okay.
No, and so every year you've got... The big problem they've got in the reserve that I was hunting in is... because they've done such a good job, hunting's done such a good job in the last 7 years since they've had hunting there to rehabilitate it to what it should be. The grasslands have come back. Everything is really thriving. The goat and cow herders from outside of the reserve are now using it to graze herds in, and that is putting pressure on the wild populations of animals. So, it's a constantly evolving issue. The biggest thing that I saw as a problem there wasn't poaching, it was habitat encroachment. So every year they lose another 2 or 3 kilometres on the outside of the reserve. They've got demarcation boundaries, but honestly, I've never seen more people living in smaller spaces of land as I did. I drove 8 hours from where I was to the main airport in Entebbe to leave, and I could have got a charter flight, but I chose to drive so I could really get a sense of the country. And it was a remarkable difference from inside the reserve to the journey, where it was just, not a very nice place actually.
Okay, so just before I come to Steve, Keith, the Shambaisation of Eastern, particularly Eastern Africa, because it's a bit perhaps we all know quite well, is that going to kill hunting faster than anything else?
Kill hunting, or just ensure it doesn't come back in countries like Kenya, but kill the habitat. And the habitat means you can't have any form of wildlife-based industry, whether hunting, whether photographic safaris. What's happened, for example, on the edge of the Masai Mara in Kenya is where it used to be huge areas of grassland over which the Masai moved their cattle on a seasonal basis. They coexisted, not always peacefully, but pretty well coexisted with the wildlife. That's going, and it's going because it's been fenced off, because of the idea that the modern future for agriculture in those areas should be small, fenced-off, individually owned plots. This doesn't suit most of the Maasai, only the well-off ones who can buy up the land cheaply.
Of course.
And it drives out the wildlife, degrades the countryside, and you get the sort of thing you've been talking about, where it just becomes a desert where you have no wildlife and people are living on the edge, really on the edge.
We've had a few more people join us since we started this. We're talking about African big game hunting. Is anybody changing their minds about African big game hunting of any kind, tourism hunting? Is anybody who didn't support it thinking it's a good idea, or worse, anybody who did support it now think it's a terrible idea? You do. Right, so I'm going to take a question for the audience then. Hold on a second. I've got the magic stick. I shall bring it to you. Right, yes.
I came in here not knowing what this was about. I didn't even know there was hunting in Africa, and I feel absolutely mortified. I don't understand why you can't find your fun somewhere else instead of killing innocent animals.
Well, a quick round of applause for our auntie. I'm so pleased we've got one. Thank you very much for saying that. I think we're going to have to cover this in the round because you've hit on basically what the whole subject is about. But I'm glad if it's raining, we're keeping you out of the rain. Now, back to the question itself. Sorry to dismiss you like that, but I think this this is how we're covering it. The wider question of how we're going to defend tourism hunting, Steve, as the attacks get stronger and stronger, how do you recommend?
What we're looking into at SCI is an educational forum with a PR message that actually informs people of the benefits of hunting. And whilst hunting is clearly not for everyone, what we need to do is explain to people so that they understand why it is necessary for it to take place. There is no alternative in many areas, and it may offend you, but until somebody does come up with a workable alternative, which is definitely not there and definitely not offered by the antis, it is the most sustainable way of maintaining, as we've said, habitat, and habitat is there to support wildlife. Thank you.
So, Simon, is offering the facts to the antis enough, or do we need, I mean, you are also a PR guy, do we need a kind of PR strategy that includes the kind of grandstanding we're seeing from the antis back at us?
I'm really perplexed by it, Charlie. I really don't know what the answer is. Of course, we all need to stand together and try and educate.
And we need to present the facts.
We need to present the facts. But, you know, I'm very fearful. People talk about the good old days of hunting. For me, I think we are in the good old days of hunting. I think my children will not have the opportunities, and I'm very sad to say it, will not have the opportunities to do the things that I've had the pleasure of being able to do. However good the benefits are, however much we all know that, I just think it's a message that's extremely difficult to educate people with. It's so emotive.
It is, but we can win in government. We can win with the kind of the people who run the countries on the ground. It's just the TV studios that we seem to be losing it.
And social media, that is cancerous for big game hunting and field sports and pheasant shooting and grouse shooting and everything. Social media out of context. A picture of a hunter on a dead elephant. We all know the benefits of what elephant hunting can do in Botswana, why they've reopened it, but that picture is dynamite on the front cover of the Daily Mirror, and out of context it's abhorrent to most of the population of the UK. If you try and put the facts across and you put it into context without the picture, it might not sell as many newspapers, and it's not a sexier story for them to put on the front cover. It's very, very, as I say, very emotive topic.
Are you calling for the internet to be banned?
I just think we need to be responsible with the things that we put on social media. I'm going to Botswana in May next year. I am going to shoot an elephant. I will not be putting that on social media.
You have just announced it to an audience in the game.
That's fine.
Is that all right?
But you will
not all of them are in favour of what you do.
That's fine. You can come and have a private chat with me about it. I'm very happy to explain my reasons for doing it. It's a personal desire to go and do that.
Okay.
I'm comfortable. I sleep well at night about it. There's lots of good conservation reasons that I'm happy that I've made that decision to go and do it and spend the money to go and do it. But I will not be putting that on social media or in a magazine. It would be career suicide, and I think it's bad for hunting. It's bad for the community projecting it without the context. And I think we need to be without the backstory. I think we need to be responsible when we're putting these things in a public forum. They need to be presented in such a way that there is an education with it and there's context, so people can understand why that action has taken place.
Good, Keith. Could you look into your crystal ball and tell us where we're going to be in a few years' time, please, with hunting in Africa?
I actually think I'm not too pessimistic because of the developments in southern Africa, with Botswana reinstating hunting and you'll see a lot of propaganda about it from people like the Campaign Against Trophy Hunting, who incidentally at the meeting with Michael Gove, they put round a document there they were handing out to everyone that I did a forensic analysis of. And one of my specialist areas that I teach is propaganda and the media. And this document they put round was pure propaganda, not an ounce of fact in it. They quoted people out of context to appear to support their case. And I think there is a campaign underway at the moment because they can see the changes that are taking place in southern Africa. Botswana's president reinstated hunting at the behest of his own people. Pressure from within Botswana, pressure from MPs. There was a majority vote in Parliament for it, and that is pushing it in the direction, I think, of legal, regulated hunting that will help conservation.
Okay, I thank you, Keith. We're going to have to stop it there, I'm afraid. It's a debate which can go on and on. Can I urge you to Google Africa Sustainable Conservation, which is Keith Somerville. Can I ask you to perhaps go visit the Rigby stand? You'll be able to see the Karamojo Bell rifle, which is there, is that right? And if you aren't, I'm a member of the Safari Club International. Please could you join Safari Club International? Thank you very much.
Look up our website. Thank you.
Now, Keith is going to have his book over there if you want to meet him.
Anyone want to book a discounted
He's such a plugger. I'm going to say thank you, gentlemen. And I'm going to welcome onto the stage next a man who plans to put pheasants on our plates. It's Tom Adams of the British Game Alliance. He's now shake hands with everybody on the way here. Tom, welcome to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Adams. Come and sit. Right, pheasants, quite a lot smaller than elephants, aren't they?
Indeed, indeed.
Okay, you started the BGA, what was that, 2 years ago?
Yep, nearly 2 years ago.
You haven't aged at all, have you managed? It must have been most stressful 2 years of your
really
life.
breezy kind of 18 months, 2 years. No, not at all. It's been a challenging couple of years, but a passionate one, and yeah, it's been good.
What is the aim of the BGA? What have you tried to do? And then I'm going to follow that up, obviously, with what have you managed, what have you achieved?
Sure. So the BGA set up 2 years ago to address the game markets, which everyone was aware was declining in many cases. Game had a negative value, a very real threat to shooting, because if we can't find a good market for our game, we can't justify what we do. And so a big part of what we're trying to achieve, set up a marketing board like AHDB for the other agricultural sectors, promote game, find new markets for game, and really drive it forward so that shoots once again are being paid for game.
We did have initiatives like Game to Eat and Taste of Game. Can it replace us or go alongside those? How does that work?
Sure, no, we work very closely with both Basque's Taste of Game and Country Alliance Game to Eat. Quite often they focus to promote game within our own community. The BGA is very much focusing on getting game mainstream into the public through new product developments, game products that are commercially viable for large contract caterers and pub groups, etc., where otherwise we would just offer them oven-ready pheasants. And so try to make game more accessible is a big mission of ours.
Make game more accessible to somebody in a supermarket, for example. That being the main thing.
Indeed, yeah.
So you're very much in the sort of public space here, aren't you? You're not. I mean, you're preaching probably mainly to shooters, but you're in the world of North London, which might not completely understand about
Most
pheasants.
definitely. That's where all our focus and work is. As I said, it's very well covered by Taste of Game and Game to Eat. Our mission is to not only take game to the public here in the UK, but also to take it overseas. And we've done quite a bit of work with that.
I'm going to come on to the Far East in a minute, because I think that's a very important question. But just before we get there, you've probably noticed you've been under attack recently by many levels of antis, from the kind of terrorism strands who released your map of a map of shoots which they claim came from you, and also at a kind of more Packham level about the amount of lead that goes into a bird in order to bring it out of the sky, and therefore the amount of lead that goes into people in supermarkets. How do you answer those ones?
I think we all recognise that the pressures that we're under continue to rise, and whether it's the BGA or whether it's Basque or the GWCT, we are all under threats and criticism. But bringing it back to the BGA, the recent release or creation of a map with the BGA members on there was created by them, utilising our public list of shoots, which they opted in for.
These are all main. I mean, I think they're all online already, aren't they? So they could have researched it by using Google, but they happen to use BGA.
Indeed. And the only details that were available was the name and the county, and then obviously they used Google Maps and satellites and a lot of spare time to create that.
So quite a lot of sort of village-centred estate offices are going to get picketed, whereas in fact the shoot's up in the hills behind.
And that's exactly what it is. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Okay, well I'm glad that failed. But on the subject of the lead that goes into game, I mean, to somebody who doesn't know the answer, 3,500 times the amount of lead goes into some pheasants that you can find in supermarkets compared to the limit you're supposed to have in food. How do you answer that one?
I think it's a bit of a myth. I think, you know, if you speak to Waitrose and M&S, etc., they have such high standards when it comes to lead, and you know, the game processors that are supplying them have to have lead scanners and double scan it, and so that point where you can only really get a lead-free product in a cut of meat, so whether it's breast fillets or thighs, because then you can put it through the machine. But a whole bird, it still says may contain lead shot. Is it an issue? And Waitrose recently have decided to opt in for a lead-free game product going forward, piloting it this year, but next year looking for only game shot with steel, which is quite a big move for a leading, they are the leading buyers and users of games. So it'll be interesting to see how they take the game sector with them.
That was a PR problem for them more than a health problem. It wasn't a health problem for you'd already had to get the pheasants through that standard. So basically what you're saying to people here is you've got to be better shots. Is that what it is?
I think so. Maybe some people might be good at shot already.
It's your fault for hitting them, you know, there. Okay, is that right? Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I'm glad we made that point.
Yeah.
So the attacks have happened. You've stated your aims, and you have put out a couple of releases in the last week, which I must say were impressive about your work in the Far East. And you know, we always had this hope that maybe the Chinese market would discover pheasants in a big way and solve all our what do we do with the pheasants problems. Is that going to happen?
Yes, within the realms.
Because last time you came here, you said,
no, it's yes, within the realms of possibilities. So sadly, the main Chinese market is prohibited to import game and other poultry products from the UK, but yet Hong Kong and Macau and the other smaller islands isn't, being its own kind of mini country. And we are able to export there, and after a trade mission with the Department for International Trade, have secured a significant contract for pheasants this coming season.
Well, that's fantastic.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah. And how many, do you know?
So 250,000 is the minimum underwritten order, and it's the second biggest meat importer out there, and they believe the opportunity could be, you know, far greater than that. Oh, well,
that's a great success. Well done. I mean, I was in China recently. I was in the north part of the country. They don't have they don't have a kind of great culture of eating game, partly because Mao banned it. But are you going to have to kind of market the game to the Chinese, or do you think they're a bloody hungry nation. Are they just going to buy it and eat it, do you think?
Yeah, so they're going to, you know, there's a large expat market in Hong Kong, so you've got that natural expat market which buy into game much more easily than, say, the Chinese market. But the Chinese market, the guys that we're going through want to create a lot of game products with a Chinese style, so they believe that they can engage with it rather than just a British product. They can actually put their own twist on it.
Pheasant wonton.
Exactly that, yeah.
Did you try any of that while you were out there?
I tried some pretty funky stuff when I was out there, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Chinese food?
I mean, I love normal Chinese food, but it's
when
definitely
you say
not.
normal, you mean English.
But when you go over there, it's definitely not.
Chinese food.
No, Chinese food is very different.
I mean, one thing I found, I was shooting in China about 3 weeks ago, and I was pheasant shooting above the Yellow River, and one of the kind of horrifying things about China is they like to wound things because it keeps it fresh on the way to the kitchen. Not so keen on that. One of the really great things about China is within minutes of getting that bird home, you ate the whole thing. Not the beak and not the feathers, but everything else.
I think there's a lot to be said about that in terms of the utilization. Whether or not I would eat a beak or a feather, probably not.
Well, you'd have the feet, you'd have all the bones in the neck, you have the guts and everything.
But creating a waste-free product is what we should all be striving for, because there's such a big cost for the game processors in the waste of a bird. So removing that waste is probably the biggest cost a game processor has. So if we can eliminate that waste, fantastic in terms of PR story, waste-free industry, and that's when the likes of waste, I must emphasize this, dog food and other avenues for the products that can't be utilized for the human consumption, we should be exploring and are exploring to ensure that we actually utilize the whole bird.
Now, there was one of the, I think it was the same organisation that posted what it called the BGA map, which wasn't really the BGA map of game farms, shoots and game farms. They also released the footage of a shoot in Leicestershire burying breasted out birds on their estate, which I think you condemned at the time. And I had the guy who released that in front of me a couple of weeks ago, and he said, well, you know, they might have been breasted out, but you hadn't eaten the legs. I mean, that seemed to me to be a sort of slightly abstruse point. Where do you stand on that? Would you condemn that if you had? Would you have condemned that if you had known that they were all breasted out?
Most definitely. It was completely irresponsible.
Was it irresponsible in the fact you got caught, or irresponsible in the fact they did it?
Definitely that he did it in the first place. We should all recognise that that is not only a terrible PR story waiting to happen, but also an environmentally
that's about getting
harming.
Caught.
Sorry?
Isn't that about getting caught, the story waiting to happen? Whereas if the fact he did it, I mean, they had been breasted out.
True, but then the actual damage to the environment, you know, the leaching of that's wastage of birds. It wasn't one or two birds. It was a lot of birds,
and it was in a pit in a woodland on a hill in Leicestershire, and that was a bad thing.
Yeah, terrible thing in my eyes.
Okay, but you think more of a bad thing that, you know, the possible environmental damage, not the story side of it.
Well, I think it's hand in hand. You know, we've got to recognise that we all need to be responsible, whether that's, you know, with raptor persecution or whether that's with anything that condemns us. We all need to be held accountable, and that's obviously what we're trying to do through shoot standards, and certainly what one of our standards is to make sure that you find the correct way to get rid of your waste.
Okay, I will. I'll let you off that one, kind of me. But I mean, these things are going to come back and you know, beset you again and again, because the antis are definitely increasing the amount of pressure they're putting on you. Are you just going to be reactive? Is there any way you can kind of grandstand your way out of this?
I think the BGA is proactive, and it was always done on a proactive approach. You know, we all want sustainable shooting, talk about sustainable shooting, and you know, firstly correcting the game market so that it's in demand and shoots are getting paid for it. That is the sign of something that is, you know, the British public want, and if we can get behind that, that's sustainable. And standards, which the GWCT and other organisations are so, which major on so much, if we can hold those shoots accountable and demonstrate that to MPs and the antis as we talk, it's a huge opportunity to be proactive and say, well, actually, no, we don't need government intervention. We've got ourselves in the front foot, and we're doing it correct.
You're using lovely words like standards, but I mean, are you going to put a number on the number of birds that somebody should shoot in a single day? Are you going to start sort of laying down the law like that, or do you just mean a greater sense of responsibility as judged by your peers?
No, not at all. So our standards, our shoot standards, have the GWCT's guidelines on how many birds should be released in the release pens, and we stick to that, and they're audited against that. Obviously, if a shoot is found to be outside of that and detrimental to animal welfare and environmental impact, then they'll be pulled up on it, and they'll have to correct it or be kicked out of the scheme publicly and lose their badge of honour to the game dealer. And
the badge is really important, isn't it? It was growing in importance as far as the game dealer is concerned. So it is the red tractor scheme kind of writ large for shoots. Is that
exactly that? Based on the red tractor scheme, and that's the greatest and easiest way to explain it.
Okay, buy-in from shoots. I mean, there's an awful lot of land shot over in this country. Are you going for the little shoots, or just the big shoots, or everybody across the board?
So we met with Sir John Randall, who was the Special Environment Minister to Theresa May when we first set this up, and Michael Gove, and clearly said, make sure you get a spread of all shoots, not just the large commercial shoots, but small private ones as well. It can't be seen as a big boys club, but it's something that everyone can be involved with, and that's why our pricing structure is representative of that different size of shoot. And 550 estates in our first 14 months, growing exponentially. More people understand it. as I said, it hasn't come without its challenges.
Your pricing structure was, I think, at one stage based on the possibility of a kind of tax per bird. Are you still thinking along those lines, or are you? Were you thinking about pricing the BGA badge on the basis of cost per bird shot?
So number of birds shot. So up to 1,000 birds shot in a season by a shoot. So a small shoot, they would pay £100 membership, and we would actually pay for the audit, which is double, triple that. And so
okay, so that
costs us on the smaller ones, but obviously naturally with the bigger ones, we make that kind of up and spread the cost across them.
Okay, so it's a reasonably sort of equitable system, isn't it? And I mean, all shoots complain about cost.
Everyone.
So you've been coping with that situation as well.
Yep.
Have you had people say, "That's it, we're definitely not joining the BGA"?
Yeah, they tend to hail from Yorkshire quite often.
Yeah, you'll get letters.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I get letters, it tends to be from the Welsh. I don't know why. Okay, Tom, I think you've explained it absolutely brilliantly. Give us a where you'd like to be in a year's time.
We'd love to be able to have over 1,000 shoots on the books, which would hopefully represent 65% of the game market, which would represent a really
that's critical mass.
Really,
isn't it?
yeah, that's a really poignant point that we can really not throw our weight around, but demonstrate to those that are opposing shooting and regulations and standards and the game market that actually we have got things under control. We're making really great progress to that, and I'd love to see this time next year dealers offering shoots real tangible value back to game. And I'd like to think that we'll be part of that.
No, stay where you are, because I am going just to ask in the audience, is there anybody who kind of doesn't understand any aspect of the BGA? Does anybody want to ask Tom a question while he's here? Because he can't get off until I let him. It's marvellous. I've got him trapped, basically. Yes, we've got a question over here. Hold on, I'm going to come over with a microphone. Last person I asked told me she was an auntie, and we were in a trophy hunting talk. And I thought, you're probably at the wrong meeting. Please don't tell me you're an auntie.
3 vegans here. Yeah, you're very safe here. Tom, I think what you're doing is absolutely top drawer. The one thing we've found is we go to shoots, and a lot of the guns don't take birds away with them. And the one shoot we do go to that prepares oven-ready birds, everybody takes birds away with them. As part of your membership, are you going to try and encourage them to do that, to prepare oven-ready birds every time, instead of just feathered?
Really good point, and it is actually in our standards that it's a standard that we actually audit against. What does a shoot do to ensure that their guns take game home, and very much push and recognise that if the shoot is able and capable of creating value-added products, whether it's breast fillets or actually game sausages, that has to be the future for ease of us all. No one has time is something that we all don't have much of. Even though it's a shame that we might lose plucking and drawing a pheasant, but we're certainly pushing hard for that. And the way of engaging the guns with the issue, we ask our guns to include a voluntary contribution of 50p a bird on the invoice to their guns, and so their guns will receive a 200 bird day. For 10,000.
200 per day, they pay an extra
£100, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's taken up by 60-70% of the guns.
Very good at pheasants, no good at maths.
Exactly. Maths, terrible.
Anybody else want to ask a question of Tom while we got him? No? I do remember one thing from the 1990s, which I thought was probably the kind of lowest point in game meat marketing, which was when, this is before the days of Taste of Game and Game to Eat, there was this picture of this MP who'd just been handed 2 birds in feather, and he was standing there going, what am I supposed to do with these? So we've kind of come on a long way from there, haven't we?
We have, and actually Michael Gove last year wanted, and I'm not sure that he wanted this year as not Environment Secretary, a couple of oven-ready birds to show his support for the shooting community. I think he did a great job, and hopefully we can get the new Environment Minister to embrace shooting and support it, and game specifically.
Have you got any idea what she's going to be like? Teresa Villiers takes over as DEFRA Minister, doesn't she?
I think, and I hope, reading some of her past stuff, that she's actually going to be quite a force for influence in terms of sustainability.
You're the first person who said anything nice about her on this stage.
Really? Well, I have some high hopes. I read some recent old papers of hers written that were very much focused around standards and welfare, and that's obviously everything we're trying to do here with the BGA. So
you are. Okay, Tom, Adam, British Game. Oh no, we've got one more question. Sorry, before you go. Yes. Here we go.
Alistair Kirkness. What percentage of the pheasant shot go into the human food chain? Do we actually know all the numbers?
Good question. Short answer, no. I mean, if you speak to a game processor picking up all of their game, what is their wastage? You would say probably about 20% waste. You're going to get 20% of A-grade birds that are oven-ready fit, and then you got your breast fillets and your thigh fillets, and you break it down to the point where there is about a 20% natural waste. Now, obviously, that shouldn't be a waste. We were discussing earlier that we should look to dog food and other ways to have a waste-free product. But in terms of the wider industry, we don't have the stats on that, and it's very difficult with our community to try and get hard data, especially when it comes around to the game industry. So I would hate to give you a wrong answer.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I had no idea Tom was such a martinet about waste. Tom Adams from the British Game Alliance.
Thank you very much
indeed. Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much. Right, stay where you are, because we're going to talk about Ireland, and we have got one of our own stars from Field Sports Channel, the producer of Field Sports Ireland. Oh, and we have David Wright. Yes, we do. So it's a bit of a Field Sports Channel moment. If you ever watch Field Sports Channel on YouTube, you're about to find all our hidden innermost secrets. Jason Doyle and David Wright. Well, you reckon you're within hitting distance? Is that the problem? Right. If you need any introduction, Jason produces Field Sports Ireland, which is a fairly sort of low-level program compared to our flagship show, Field Sports Britain, which is presented by me. And David Wright, well, when I first found him, he was begging on the street. But look where he is today. Jason, would you like to just tell us a little bit about Field Sports Ireland, first of all?
Yeah, well, it sort of happened by accident, really. It was I'd done some work with the shooting show for Future, and just I wanted my filming and films to go in a different direction, and I thought about starting my own YouTube channel, which was a great idea, but turned out to be quite a daunting task. So just purely under the influence of my girlfriend, she said, go and speak to Charlie and David and see could I do anything with them.
So you treated us like a kind of self-help group, really, didn't you?
Yeah, it was like a last resort.
David, how do you take that?
I don't think it worked that way at all. But no, it was seeing the enthusiasm that Jason had and trying to work that into the offer that we have already. So where could we put him? What could we do with this
I'm
man?
thinking Field Sports Scotland, but France, Field Sports France, don't you think?
Maybe, I think it's.
I don't know.
So it was working with what Jason had, and there are differences. There's subtle differences, but there are differences between what happens in the UK and what happens in Ireland. So it's also really nice to have a local voice in their own nation. It's like we've just sort of re-established an African program, haven't we? So, but that is very much for African people making an African show. So an Irish guy knowing all the ins and outs of what's happening over there and bringing it to us. And also, if you are doing pigeon shooting, then it's completely different or slightly different to what Andy's doing, but you bring a different feel to it, and you're very good at explaining stuff, whether that's talking through a Benelli shotgun. Your pieces to camera are very easy because you explain.
Yeah, I'll give him that. Good. I'll give him that. He's
very good at doing that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I mean, for me, it was quite an honor to kind of work with these guys, because for probably...
Hear that? He said honor. Do you hear that?
For 10 years now, I've always found David's work quite inspirational, and not coming from a field sports background, he introduced a whole kind of mainstream media look to field sports films, which we hadn't seen before. And my passion in doing this is about promoting field sports, promoting it in a positive way, trying to entertain people within the field sports community, but also to educate people how to have a good argument with an ante, how to present ourselves properly. But I also have an eye on trying to make something that you could show to antes and not absolutely horrify them, but to possibly not change their mind, but just let them see that we're not just out trying to murder things for the sake of murdering things. And I think that's what David has done brilliantly, because people probably don't realize he's not really from a shooting background. So his journey in this has been a learning experience for you as well.
So you talk,
I just walk behind people. That's all I do. I just walk behind. I just see backs to people.
I mean, films in the public space is kind of important at the moment when we feel we're very much under attack. So half what you're doing is showing people how we shoot pigeons in Ireland, and the other half is about this is the reality of what it's like in the countryside.
Yeah.
Come and join us. It's fun.
I mean, the nuts and bolts of what we do, we're trying to educate the people who want to watch the films. But at the same time, if somebody stumbles on it, who's never watched it before, I always have an eye on give them something that's going to hook them, going to make them want to watch more, going to make them want to watch another one. And it's funny because quite a lot of people who have been involved in field sports their whole lives come along and say, I never knew that, or I never knew this, and little nuggets of things that I thought were insignificant. Even people involved in field sports mightn't have known. So for me, it's much more about the education than the entertainment.
But that's what's been helpful for me, because
I'm
now
always talking over David.
For 10 years, I'm always looking for that moment where I go, I've never heard that before. So when I first started, I didn't know whether it was all just, I was just being thick, or whether actually it was relevant. So I remember doing a film with George Digweed when he was doing a comparison between shooting cold shells and warm shells that he'd had in the radiator, and that sort of revelation of, right, this is cold shells, and there's loads of stuff in the barrel, and then these are warm shells, and there's nothing in the barrel, and it's that type of thing. It's like, oh, but lots of people didn't know that. So, and I spoke to some guy from Europe recently, and he didn't realise. He said, so many people I go and visit, they've got their shells in the radiators. We don't do that in our country. I mean, probably because it's warmer anyway. But the whole idea of warming your shells was something that I thought became, if the pros do it, then why should no one else do it?
It's not recommended by the
cartridge
manufacturers. By the way. Room temperature is fine.
Okay,
fine. No, but it is about bringing that kind of visual, that was a very easy visual thing.
Yeah, but also what's great about Jason is that he's creative, he's thinking about pictures, because he has been doing films for a while. So if anyone saw the drone stuff where you were shooting and showing lead with the drone, which is a very dangerous thing to do, however it worked, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but as I say, it's the longer you're involved in shooting, the less you want to read magazines and watch films. You just want to get on and do it. So it's all the time trying to find something new.
You can't make them stop reading magazines. They've got to keep watching, Jason. It's very important.
Okay, sorry. But it's always trying to, I mean, the physical act of going out, hunting an animal and shooting it hasn't changed in probably 100 years. So we're trying to reinvent the wheel all the time with a different angle, a different story, and just different scenery or something. And that's what I think David does so well. Even though you're not a hunter or weren't a hunter, you've managed to get into the industry so well and show it off ethically.
But it's untapped information. What was great is that when we met 10 years ago,
11
years ago, it was really an industry that had so much knowledge that had never really had an opportunity to have an airing, and that was so delightful about it. It was like, oh God, oh yeah, what do you mean you can call a fox? What? They will come to you by squeaking on that. Really? So that all that sort of stuff was, I just found extraordinary. And I remember the first time Roy called in a roebuck when I was filming it, and it's just, and he barked to make it stop. And I was like, this wild animal's coming charging towards me. What the hell is going on here? I'd never seen anything like that before. And I'd seen all BBC Wildlife Award and everything else, but no one ever showed me that. So that was completely different. So
it was a sense of open goal, wasn't there? I mean, we'd had 60 years of television to replacing the fireplace in the corner of the room, but they've really not covered shooting since the 1970s. So I mean, 30 years, 40 years, nobody really shown anything at all.
The wealth of knowledge, it was just untapped.
And it was also tremendously televisual. The stuff that luckily for us. Nothing to do with your raw talent, David, as you might have thought. Luckily for us, the subject has lent itself to what we do.
Completely. And think how many road calling films there are now.
Oh yeah, no, yes. We invented it,
Well, no, but the thing is, when we were first talking about it, we didn't know if people would talk to us about their hunting.
No, that's very true.
That was a real fear.
Yeah.
So the first time we went out and filmed something was some fox shooting down the West Country with you.
Yes.
And it was like we managed to get some guys to talk to us.
Well, do you find this now, Jason? Is Ireland more conservative than the UK?
I would go as far as to say yes. You find some people who are so confident in what they do, they're confident in their areas in their knowledge that they're prepared to lay it all out. You have other people who don't want other hunters to know what they're up to, where they're up to it. Hunting is funny. Like a guy I started deer stalking with years ago, he said to me, be careful because hunters hunt hunters. And I think this is something that we see on a daily basis inside and outside the industry, or the media end of the industry. But it's sort of trying to ignore all the negativity and keep pushing on and finding the people who are prepared to tell you their story, and emphasizing how much fun it can be to work with these guys and to promote them. And I mean, you've got some fantastic guys on the channel, and it's a question I get asked a lot is like, oh, how do you get into working on field sports? It's usually totally by accident. I mean, you've spoken about it before.
Almost everything is.
Anybody within driving distance of David has a good chance of being asked to be on field sports.
If you just watch Field Sports Channel, you think that the only shooting that takes place in the whole of the UK happened in Kent.
It's true.
But
it's
no,
true, but I mean,
there's some fantastic guys in the sport, and we just try our best to promote the good side of it. But yeah, it's a little bit tricky. Some people are still very cagey. Some people don't like.
I notice your pheasant shoots, for example, don't like to be promoted as pheasant shoots. We go and film pheasant shoot in the UK, and they'll say, please can you make sure you put our details below so that people can contact us. Irish tend to say, please don't put our details there.
I mean, here's a question for you. If you were starting Field Sports Britain now, how do you think it would go?
Well, as a 28-year-old, as I am.
Jeez. It's a very busy place on YouTube now.
Yeah,
very
it's tricky. I mean, YouTube has become a difficult place. When we started Field Sports Channel back in the early 12th century, I mean, YouTube was a place for skateboarding cats. You could put a 3-minute video up every couple of weeks, and people would get to know you. Now, you need a production team. You've got to put out 2 or 3 10-minute films every week, and probably more than that. And somebody said the other day, and I think very accurately, he spends 2 days a week making films, 2 days a week promoting those films on social media, and 1 day a week chasing the invoices. So, it's very small amount of your week actually goes into creating beautiful stuff like this.
Yeah. And that's probably something a lot of the Field Sports subscribers don't even realize, the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And I mean, shooting is hard enough. Nothing is scripted, nothing happens to a plan.
The amount of people that talk about storyboards, I've never done a storyboard.
Yes, that's right.
I've never done a storyboard.
We did one once, didn't we?
That was just because we had to, but we didn't really.
The amount of times that we go out and we don't get anything worth showing as well.
The amount of times I've heard you should have been here last week. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I know.
Right, I'm going to say something nice about Jason, because it's really difficult to find somebody who can do what we want. That is somebody who's very presentable, very good at shooting, has a broad understanding of the sponsorship market, can film and edit, do all these things. Bits. Okay, small shout out for Aaron, who's at the back there, who apparently takes part in the editing process. We don't know why, but thank you, Aaron. But Jason is fairly remarkable, and we found it with Rich Leonard in South Africa. I think we restarted African Hunter, his series yesterday, and we're trying very hard to get more shows out from around the world, especially the English-speaking world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. But getting the Jason is not easy.
The hardest thing is one of the toughest things is speed. That's because we do a weekly show. I know that obviously you're a monthly show, but it's the turnaround of content that is quite difficult. You can get people who can film, you can get people who can edit, but trying to do it fast and efficiently and actually get a finished product is the real tough thing. So if you're going to have regular content going out, that is the hard part. It's being able to. And I was lucky coming into this, having been at news. So with news, your deadline's 6 o'clock every day, and it doesn't move and it doesn't change. And if you don't edit in time, then you don't broadcast in time, and you don't have a job. So deadlines are something that I find really difficult. When we've got 7 o'clock coming on a Wednesday, I am tearing my hair out because somebody else hasn't done the thumbnails, or I'm waiting for Hunting YouTube,
Jason,
or
Aaron,
I'm waiting for a VO,
Aaron,
and I can see that 7 o'clock, and I know it doesn't really. Maybe some people are wanting to watch us at 7 o'clock, but I can tell you now, if you are at 7 and it hasn't come out, the frustration you'll be feeling from West Kent will be enormous because it
Waves
just goes
of
against the
frustration.
grain. I never missed a deadline when I worked for ITV.
I never
ever.
missed a
And
deadline.
so missing 7 o'clock
Back
is
in my
very
day.
painful. And it's
Okay.
usually his fault.
Yeah, usually my fault. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Jason, do you suffer from David as much as I do?
No, I've been,
you little
I've been pretty lucky.
special boy, you.
I usually have Aaron barking at me for the last,
Yeah, no, that-
yeah.
good.
Sorry, yeah. Aaron gives him the grief, not me.
the last week of the month. Where's this and where's that? And yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't do this as a full-time job, so I'm trying to fit it in with various other things at the same time. So any deadline is difficult if you don't do things on time, I suppose.
I said one of the biggest problems I have with Aaron is he just doesn't seem to notice when I run out of batteries in my walkie-talkie. I don't know about you.
Walkie-talkie. There we go. Sorry, Jonesy. I think that
Caught.
probably sums it up, doesn't it? But self-shooting something completely.
If you want to annoy David, just say edit around it. He hates that. He really does.
But no, I mean self-shooting. I'm very fortunate. I don't do the only self-shooting I do is the news, which is obviously multiple cameras when I do it. But you hunt and self-shoot. That trying to film wild boar from a high seat on your own, I would not want to do.
It definitely adds to the excitement of it. But I've filmed a driven boar hunt on my own before as well.
There we go, yeah.
But it's down to luck, really.
Do you put a camera in your hat, or
yeah,
like that?
cameras everywhere. But I'm very lucky at home. I've got some really good mates who I've hunted with for years and years who are very happy to have a camera chucked at them and point that at me and stuff like that. And
yes, you need understanding friends.
Very understanding friends.
That works.
Very understanding missus as well. She's been known to hold the camera, and I'm very careful how I explain things to her.
Can we have a little ripple of applause, please? I don't think people realise the importance of the woman who stands behind the man. Just show. There we are. Little ripple. Thank you. Well done. Good work. Thank you.
Yeah. She gets about half an hour a day of my time. I'm coming home from work and then sitting on the computer at home, sorting through rushes and footage and talking to Aaron and talking to David and stuff. So she puts up with a lot, in fairness to her. But yeah,
Right.
she knows I love it, and she knows that I'm doing it for genuine reasons, trying to promote hunting as the greater good. And
we're getting self-indulgent. Who'd like to see David do the turn, the move, like
behave?
The
No,
stalking the
it's
stories?
fine. It's fine.
Come on, up there. Come on, up you go.
joking.
Come on, up you go. Sit there. Yes,
What's
come
this
on.
week's show?
you can sit on my knee and do it if you want.
Yeah, he's going to get up. He's going to do it.
I'm not going to sit. I'm not like to sit on.
I'll do
you
it.
do it. You
Okay,
do
this-
it. What's
This
your
is what he does.
CV, whatever it's
Okay,
called,
this is what he
yeah?
does. He puts the camera there. Okay.
I hope most of the people in
And
the
turns
audience.
like that, and he turns like that, and he turns like that, and he goes stalking the stories, fishing for facts, and there's a cut in the middle, and he puts one at the beginning of the news, and one. I'm sorry, I'm spoiling the magic.
Well, I
But
hope
what I love about this is we reach the end of the news, which he probably hasn't read, not because he's sloppy, but he's sloppy, and it'll be a funny story, and it'll be funny, ha ha ha, and then he goes stalking the story, fishing for facts.
I know. I forget what the last story is because I've
love
already
that.
done it, so I've missed. Anyway, yeah, whatever.
All right, if you're not going to do it, that's it. You're out of here. No, we've indulged ourselves enough. Can I say?
Are we out?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, we're gone.
Bugger off.
All right.
Done. Okay.
Thank you very much, David
you.
Wright and Jason
I feel like
Doyle.
a filler there. We've been a filler.
Well done. Well applauded. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. Okay, next up on stage is Peter Glenser, who I can see over here. Are you former or are you still BASC chairman? No longer chairman. My goodness, just dizzying heights. Peter Glenser, who is also a shooting barrister. Please welcome on the stage. Have a microphone and a seat. Good. Now, we're talking about some of, well, perhaps not the legal battles you've been involved in, but I mean, shooting and the law has been bumping into itself and each other for over 1,000 years, really. Not shooting, but wildlife and the law.
Yeah, I think there's a long and intertwined history between shooting and the law, not least because the law tends to look after landowners, or historically has looked after landowners.
Does it? If you noticed?
The law seems to follow the landowning class. So we've had hundreds of years of legislation, and sometimes very dramatic legislation, the Black Acts, which introduced 50 different accounts that carried the death penalty, including being found in a forest disguised at night. And there was all sorts of unpleasant gelding and transportation, all sorts of things. For a good long time, we had quite a lot of restrictive and pretty draconian laws looking after people's pheasants and partridges and so forth. And then it started to change a bit. It got a little bit more relaxed in the 19th century. And perhaps lackadaisical attitude to safety then. And you might have thought those would have brought up all sorts of marvellous court cases. But in those days, if you peppered a beater, you just did the decent thing and gave him your purdies and a stipend for life. And the beaters themselves could be quite relaxed about it.